Hello. So we're going to talk a bit about writers of verse. We saw prose before this. The aforementioned authors of the new American literary identity were writers of prose. The American public wanted representation in verse as well. So the answer came with the fireside poets. The fireside poets, also known as the household poets and schoolroom poets, included Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, William Cullen Bryant, John Greenleaf Whittier, James Russell Lowell, and Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Let's take a look at the name here for a sec. Fireside poets, household poets, schoolroom poets. So just the name itself has a nice tone to it, well, especially at least the first two. But they're poets that were read at home, in school, and very, very well known around the way. I'm going to talk about a couple of them now, but I will return to this later once we establish more romanticism and more verse. I just wanted to put this in for the first part of American identity because of what I'm going to explain about the reaction to the British verse. So we've got a picture of them here, and you can see, look like old photos, daguerreotypes that were taken and put together. So before cable TV, social media, and YouTube, which you are all familiar with, I imagine, and even the radio. Remember the time, well, you don't remember probably, but you've heard about times even before, TV, when people would sit around and listen to the radio, and the radio would have all types of entertainment. This is before that, a time when families and friends would sit around the fire, they would share stories, and they would share verse, and they would read to each other. From that practice and that idea came the idea of the group of poets. So the word fireside is taken for that because people would sit around the fireside and share. It was also used, fireside itself, the word was also used in the title of some of these poetry collections. So it's a word that came up and was used, so, just a kind of cultural minute here. So yeah, I'm home and all of us have different devices with the headphones on, and there'll be 4 or 5 people at my house, sitting around 4 people at my house, and we're just sitting there, we all watching our own stuff or doing our own work. It's just, even before this, let's step back. When I was younger, we had a black and white TV, it had tubes, you turn it on, you had to wait like 2 minutes, and finally it warmed up. And then we would sit around and we'd watch shows together. We'd watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and then The $6 Million Man when I was younger. As a family, it was Sunday night, I remember that. Before that, it was the radio. Before that, it was the fireside poets. So you can see this whole idea of entertainment, maybe what we've gained and what we've lost, but the idea of sharing, the idea of community, the idea of literature, the idea of appreciation of verse back then was something that was just inherent in what described communities, be them families or friends, or even at school, memorization of certain verse. So, back to the poets. Despite all this talk of originality, some considered their style not purely autochthonous to the same regard as the aforementioned writers of prose, because they were seen as a mirror of the great British poets of the time, such as Shelley, Keats, and Lord Byron, great romantic poets. So we're looking for something that's autochthonous to the area, something that is originally American. So what would that originality be? We saw this in verse, in prose before, sort of to the representation of specific types of literature and people that shows different regions where things were, where they were written. But here we've got people that are commented or criticized for their imitation of some other writers across the way. However, Despite similarities in form, style, and meter to British poetry, the Fireside Poets were extremely popular through the 19th century for their accessibility and thematic appeal. So even though it wasn't completely original per se, in terms of, its unique production, a connection to the land, connection to this, it was a poetic voice from American poets that were appreciated and not just written to be written. They were written and they were appreciated and they were very popular in school and at home. The subject matter was focused on the here and now of those times. In general, the poems were about home and hearth, politics, and daily life, and were written in general to a general audience without solipsism and esoteric significance. So, solipsism is writing for yourself, writing so no one else understands. It's just about you. I write for me to express myself. I don't care what other people think. No, this is not that way. And it's not esoteric. It's not, there's not a small, tiny metaphysical meaning in here or cosmological, cosmogonic, or, it doesn't have all that little crazy, all that stuff that comes out later we're going to look at, which is beautiful in its own way. But this is very, approachable. Once again, accessible to people to read because it sounds good. The themes are common. It's easily shared. The verses are short. We'll take a look, in general, but we'll take a look at some of these different ideas. So, some, once again, criticize the depth and scale of quality of the poems produced and desires writers to explore beyond the structured versification and rhythm. There's a certain amount of originality here. There's a certain amount of, still taking from the masters. But the American masters are being developed, and we have some here with the Fireside Poets. So it was yet this structure that gave these poems their fame. They were easy to memorize and recite. Their cadence was attractive to the ear, at home as well as in school. As an example, here's the first stanza of the poem, She Came and Went by James Russell Lowell. As a twig trembles which a bird lights on to sing, then leaves unbent, so is my memory thrilled and stirred. I only knew she came and went. Yeah, very simple, but it's got a nice sound to it. Bird, stirred, unbent, went, A-B rhyme. Short verse, easy to memorize maybe. It's a good example of the Fireside Poets. William Cullen Bryant, also one of the Fireside Poets. He's considered one of the first romantic writers. Like I said, there's an overlap here with this development, and we're going to take a deeper look at this later on. Here's a nice photograph of him here. You can see the way it's photographed also, the way it's very sharp in the beginning, very sharp here on this side of his face, and then it kind of gets blurry behind it, some of the irregularities in the photography of the era. So this fellow was also the editor of the New York Evening Post and worked in journalism for some 50 years. A lot of the writers of this time are also connected to literary criticism. They're connected to many newspapers. They're not going to make all their money writing poetry, so, they're going to get a job in something else. And it's really interesting to see what sort of other professions that a lot of these writers had, not just writers, but some of the painters, some of the philosophers, some of the musicians, just across the arts, across the letters in general. And in this case, there's a lot of people that are connected to journalism because it's along the same lines of writing, but this is definitely a career that he had for a very long time. His first book of poetry was entitled Poems. He's got this meditative style, which is connected to Romanticism. It's connected to the idea of thought, inner self. Once again, like when we moved away from neoclassic literature, from the Age of Enlightenment, we're moving away from that collectivism, we're moving more into a subjectivism, and this meditative sense is reflected in that. So his most famous poem is Thanatopsis, which is a reflection on death. In it, he says that we should not fear the end, as it is a natural process of nature and of life. So this is interesting, because if you think about this in relation to a lot of the previous colonial literature, you know, Day of Doom, whoa. This is a lot more accepting, a lot more, I don't want to say it's not passive, it's just, it's accepting with, you know, sometimes it's referred to as a serene sadness. It's an acceptance of things, and because you can't change it, you accept it. And do not fear the end. It's just a natural process. We are all part of nature. This connection to nature in Romanticism is particularly important. So let's take a look here. Yet not to thine eternal resting place shalt thou retire alone, nor couldst thou wish couch more magnificent. So this idea here of couch, lying down, you're relaxed. It's saying this is a magnificent couch that we're lying on, no? And the idea of a resting place, no? Thou shalt lie down with patriarchs of the infant world, with kings, the powerful of the earth, the wise, the good, fair forms, and hoary seers of ages past, all in one mighty sepulchre. So this idea here is we're lying down with some of the great minds and people. It happens to everybody. Do not be scared. This is a process, part of life, part of the change and the rhythms that we're all exposed to. Here are some other lines from other fireside poets. Like I said, we're going to see these more in depth as we move on, but I just wanted to kind of give you a glance now. So Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., Daily Trials by a Sensitive Man. Storms, thunders, waves, howl, crash, and below till ye get your fill. Ye sometimes rest, men can never be still, but in their graves. So look at this structure here, these two short lines, this rhymes with this, these two rhyme here. It's got this nice flow here. Storms, thunders, and waves. Storm, thunder, wave. Howl, crash. So the connection of nature. Okay? Nature's connected here to men that can never be still, but in their graves. So the idea here of connection between nature and humanity here. People cannot be still. People are like nature, always tumultuous, always changing. They're having this big connection. And this connection is very important in the Romantic era. You can see it in painting, you can see it in writing, you can see it across the board, how if there's a sad poet or a sad painter, they'll paint a sad scene. If they're happy, they'll paint a happy scene. So, you know, life is art is an imitation of life. Here's another excerpt by John Greenleaf Whittier, Flowers in Winter. How strange to greet this frosty morn in graceful counterfeit of flower. These children of the meadows born, of sunshine and of showers. Once again, we've got the ABAB form, definite connection here. We can see the connection to nature, flowers in winter. We've got the dichotomy there of flowers and winter instead of flowers in summer, or snow in winter. It's a great opposition here, talking about, once again, the opposition. These children of the meadows, of sunshine and of showers. The meadows born here, the idea, juxtaposition, but the connection between human life and nature.